And if you really look at it, I don't do anything original, but what makes it original is me doing it. You see, that's the key.
Yeah.
Right. Because I will never sound like any of those guys anyway. And I stopped worrying about that. I'm going to learn that lick and I'm going to do it my way, or exactly like he's doing it, but somehow it's going to sound like me. And that touches on exactly what you're talking about is, and really, if you really want to go deep into this, down the rabbit hole, you know, you look at the infinite intelligence where all art comes from, whatever, the heavens or whatever. It all exists. It all will exist and already has existed. Do you know what I mean? So you're just an antenna for it anyways. So you can't claim there's like, I really don't believe there's any such thing as originality or anything like that. It's just, you're going to perceive stuff that came before you. You're going to learn stuff and then you're going to regurgitate it your own way. And like you said, if you use it, if you do it properly and you express yourself doing it, then that's the way of the artist right there.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte. Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles so that you can claim your own path and make your life a work of art.
All right, everybody, we got another podcast for you. And this time we got a guest. And we have a really cool guest that I got to drive in a car with for 14 hours out into Alberta as we went and discovered the interior of BC together. And we had some great conversations, and I had to get him on the podcast because he's an awesome dude. I think he has some amazing things to say. His name's Shawn Meehan, and he's the lead singer of the band Trigger Mafia, which just released.
And lead guitarist, Brandon. I'm going to have to make sure you put that in there.
Thank you for adding that.
And they just released their CD, which we're going to give you all the details at the end of this conversation. He's going to tell you how to get it and where to go and how to see him if you want to do that. And right now we're just going to kind of get into your story. I feel like I'm going to give your band a little bit of an intro, you a little bit of an intro, and then let's just take it and we'll see where it goes. So you put on your website as a description, you put this: out of the garage, straight from the garage to the stage, Trigger Mafia is the quintessential rock revival project with a modern spin. Coming from all walks of life, the band is set on a path to personify some of the most pressing issues of today, as well as document the human condition in the rawest of forms. I love that. I think that's such a cool mission statement and what you guys are doing. You let me listen to some of your music on the drive, and I was really, really impacted by the song that you shared with me, and how you actually connected with the other Carl, who was going to be on today, but he's not today. How you guys connected and how that kind of brought you guys together. So maybe let's just get into it, man. How did this Trigger Mafia, how did it come to be, and what's the story?
Wow. Okay. Do we have more than an hour? Or no?
We do.
It's a big story, man. Big story. Well, I shared some of it obviously with you on the drive. That was a really fun drive, actually. It was really cool to get to know each other on that drive, and I want to start by thanking you guys for inviting me here. This is very cool. How did this start? Well, it's a very unique situation because we started as a result of the pandemic. I don't think this band would exist if the pandemic didn't happen. It was a bit of an anomaly. These are the best players I've ever played with. And it would have been virtually impossible to pin these guys down to be in a band full time because they're so busy and they're so in demand. So it started with two of the three guys, the bass player and the drummer, Jay Witter and Rod Senft. And we had just been in another band that collapsed partly because of the pandemic, but also other reasons. It was kind of on the verge. The pandemic was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It was just one of those, okay, this band's not going to get together anymore. But I've known Rod and Jay a very long time. They're like family to me. So we said, well, let's keep getting together, socially distancing in this big rehearsal hall. And let's just, we coined it rock and roll therapy. And so we didn't know what we were going to do. We just got in, okay, what do we do now? And we just started jamming and started doing kind of throwback to what it was like to be in the garage as a teenager. That's why we said out of the garage. You know, go back to that place of innocence where, you know, I remember being in bands 13, 14, 15 years old, and we had no idea how the business worked. We just wanted to get together and play music and be cool to our friends, you know, or whatever. It was nothing more than that. And so we went back to that place and started jamming. And then of course it just evolved into what it is right now. So that's the sort of short answer of how it started.
Amazing.
Cool. Yeah. I listened to your album, you know, started listening to it through last night. And you know, the music that, like, knowing nothing about you, Brandon really didn't preempt me. He sent me the materials, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what kind of music you were playing. I started listening to it before I'd even read the bio, and you know, the music definitely speaks to, you know, my heart and soul, in the sense of like the sound. Like I was like, oh, this is real rock and roll. Like this is rock and roll. And then I go and I start reading up on the materials, and it's like, okay, rock revival group and all of that. It seems like that has become, like, rock and roll is seeing a resurgence in the sort of a larger population again, I suppose, you know, like some band, like I like the Marcus King band, and of course there's someone like, you know, Greta Van Fleet, you know, these sort of that would probably be the biggest sort of group in the sort of rock revival thing. What is it about rock and roll and what it represents that you think that is getting sort of the spotlight again?
Well, I think there's a few different reasons. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, so I tend to try to look at things not only from just a musical or artistic point of view, but from a business point of view, and from a, you know, try to bring a little rationality and reason into why things are the way they are. And I think there's a couple of reasons. I think all the great bands are dying off. I think, you know, Led Zeppelin died off a while ago, but you know, there's this audience of I think, made up mostly of middle-aged men that long for the early days of rock and roll when they were kids and whatever. They've gotten to this point in their life where their kids are out of the house. They're sort of having this midlife crisis. They want to experience that rock and roll thing again, but they can't go see their favorite bands because most of them are dying off. You know, there's a few, but so I think they're out. They're out trying to rediscover that. That's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is what's old is new, is old is new, is old is new again. You know what I mean? So you've got these kids that, you know, you mentioned Greta Van Fleet, for example, right? You know, they most likely found their dad's records, found an old Led Zeppelin record, and, you know, whatever. Whoa, what's this? And it was new to them. And then, you know, to them, it's not rehashing. It's just an extension of rock and roll. They just learned their instruments. They went, wow, this is really cool. So we're going to do this. So there's that aspect as well. And I think, well, rock and roll is awesome. And you know, most musical styles generally last only a few decades and then they fade away, like jazz and blues and all these sort of a lot of people don't realize that jazz was the pop music of its day. You know, back in the 1920s, it was what you heard on whatever media was available at the time. It's what people were into. It's what kids were into. It's hard to believe that, but it's true. And so rock and roll has had this sort of 67-year sort of lifespan. And I think it's because it just has this unique, because it's awesome. You know, it's lasted much longer than I think anyone expected. I remember seeing an interview with Mick Jagger from the Stones in 1965. They were about 2 years in or something. And he's like, yeah, you know, I think this might last another year or two, and then, you know, rock and roll will phase out and go off. And so who would have ever thought it would last this long? I also think there's a unique thing that's happened with the internet, that it's allowed to remove gatekeepers to a certain degree, and it's allowed guys like us to keep going. You know, I think guys at our age in the 80s or any other time would have been almost laughed at. What are these guys doing? Right? We wouldn't have a shot. I mean, you know, ageism and all these sort of things. But now you've got the internet, And so you've got this whole people rediscovering, once again, what's old is new, right? And rediscovering all this great music. And then it's being sort of reinvented, but sort of redone, like what these bands that you mentioned doing. And I think what we're doing to a certain degree. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, they covered a lot of ground with that one.
Yeah. I tend to answer about 4 questions per question. Yeah.
Keep that in mind.
So, you guys can hear me, right?
Perfectly.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Well, sometimes I turn my mic off every now and then and I forget. Anyway, I was going to say, something about your music also, it has a bit of a story, like a narrative to it. A lot of it does. And I also found that a lot of it had like it's actually trying to communicate something, I almost want to say it's like, what's the right word? It's like a tale, like something that's a little bit like more, you know what I mean? Like it's there's a lot of symbolism I noticed in a lot of the music, and there's kind of these underlying stories that are like playing out. Like, is that something that you kind of came across later in because you've been playing since you were like, what, 7 years old or something?
Yeah, I've been playing a long time. I don't want to admit how long I've been playing.
Yeah,
but it's been a long time. And I've been working at the craft of songwriting and performing and all these sort of things over the years. And to answer your question, you're absolutely right. I don't know if it was done intentionally or maybe subconsciously on this record. But one thing I learned, or that I wasn't doing over the years, and I was songwriting, I was trying too hard to write hit songs, because I write for other people and I produce other people, and I've had a few charting singles and all that sort of stuff. And you get caught in this world of, we got to write a hit, and in this record, because it started out with, being rock and roll therapy, let's screw all that. I'm just going to go back to more of an innocent approach to writing. And then what started to happen was I went on a big Jordan Peterson kick over the last few years. And he talks a lot about archetypes. And I thought, why don't I bring that approach to the writing? I don't even know if I consciously did at first. I just realized I was doing it, I think. And so, and I wanted to, when you mentioned the bio or the intro or our mission statement in the beginning, we throw back to the 70s and 80s, and but the bands of the 70s did a lot of that. Rush was a band that we're all influenced by, and they would these great stories, and if you dug deep into them, there was really strong political messages and things like that. So that's what I was sort of going for, like trying to write from an archetypal point of view, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, I think it's really powerful, because you're listening to music and maybe you like the tune and you like the sound of it. You're kind of like getting the flow of that. And then all of a sudden you kind of like take a moment to like listen to what's actually being talked about, and not just listen, but like really listen, like hear what's going on and what maybe the artist is saying underneath the lines. And I found that there was some really cool moments with your music where I was like, oh yeah, that's a really cool thing. Like about friendship and about like finding yourself and stuff like that I think, those things are, they're so timeless, they're stuff that we could hear, I think, a million times over. And every artist that tells us something about like finding yourself or about friendship or about love or about like living on purpose, and they just give you their little take on it, it's somehow new all over again and all meaningful. I think that's why like movies always have like a romantic plot line, because everybody wants to investigate love, like everybody wants to investigate friendship. Everybody wants to investigate purpose.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I mean, I just, I don't know if I have as much of a question, but it's like, straight from the garage, the whole idea is like that you're doing this out of like the love of music again, not like to just create a hit, but like, let's play music that we love. Right.
Absolutely. Like I wanted to sort of like I said, the pandemic, I think for a lot of people, probably most people, sort of turned their world upside down. And I always like to use those situations to grow and not to sit there and, oh, poor me, poor me. It was more like, well, everything's getting turned upside down. What can I learn from it? And what can I do? How can I prosper from it? How can I learn from it? How can I, and when I say prosper, I don't necessarily mean financially. I mean spiritually. I think that that's where real wealth if I've learned anything with time and age, is that true wealth is spiritual wealth. It has nothing to do with how much you have in the bank or all that kind of stuff. So I thought, okay, well, how can I grow from this spiritually? And so I wanted to go to a place, an innocent place of, I have children in my life, and I watch them, and when they create, it's just pure. There's no intention behind it, but just pure innocence, just pure expression. And so I tried to learn from that. And so, well, where am I at? How do I want to express myself? And that's sort of, these songs started to come out, and there's some angry stuff in there, and there's some political stuff in there, and there's some song tribute to my best friends in there, and all that kind of thing. So, it was just, I was trying to, like, a good analogy would be this. I've always been a fan of, just paintings, for example. And the reason being is because I still have my innocence to them. I don't know how to paint. I don't know the first clue about it. I've never watched the documentary on painting, and I never will, because I want to maintain that innocence to it. When I look at a painting, how does it make me feel? And because I've lost that with music, every time I listen to music, it feels like work. And the same thing with movies. You probably experienced this. I haven't. I don't want to learn anything about movie making. I don't want to. So even when I'm hanging out with guys like you, I don't want to ask those questions. Don't tell me how to. I don't want to. Don't ruin it for me. And one painter in particular I've never understood till recently was Picasso. I never understood why people, what the hell is this stuff? I couldn't get it until recently, until my son came home with a painting that looked a lot like one of his, and I went, whoa. And I loved that painting because it was my son, and I liked the expression, and because I knew him, and I thought, oh, I get it. The reason, because he painted from a very childlike, innocent place. And it took a lifetime to figure that out. So I went, okay, well, I've got to go there. I've got to go back to that place. Now, here's the cool thing. I'm not 14 anymore. I'm quite a bit older, but I can go back to that. What would I wish I could have been able to do at 14? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Now I've got all this worldly knowledge. And I think that's the shame of, I'm going on a tangent a little bit, but that's the shame of ageism a little bit is you really, the cool thing about getting older is you really figure out a lot of shit that you wish you knew when you were younger. And so why not use that information and use that growth and then go back to an innocent place, like come full circle. And that's really what I'm going back to what you were talking about, is that's why we said out of the garage, out of that, back to that place when we were 13, 14 years old, and just pure innocent creativity, but full circle. Do you know what I mean?
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think that's such a great question that any artist in any medium can ask themselves, is like, what do I wish I could have done at 14? With all of the know-how, all of the skills, the learning how to direct that sort of just what at 14 is just sort of a raw sort of creative energy, right? And being able to focus that. But yeah, sometimes there's that element of getting older, I've experienced that as well, where it's just like you don't necessarily feel that same sort of creative freedom, which is sometimes the thing that you have to find as you get older. So it sounds like a little bit with Trigger Mafia and with the music that you were making, it was a return. It was a bit of an experiment in that.
It was absolutely that, and that was the I pride myself in being an eternal optimist, although my family would disagree with me when they hang out with me all the time. I don't come across as one sometimes, but the entrepreneur in me is always looking for where's the advantage to this disadvantage. And here we were, for the first time in our lives, we weren't able to do anything. Kind of like when you're in high school, you're kind of restricted when you're in high school. You go to school, you come home, you got all these rules, and you just kind of sit there, and you're supposed to do these things. And we thought, well, here we are, we're getting together a couple days a week, and this is kind of cool. I saw the thing that I liked about it was, wow, the whole world has shut down, and how many people will get to really experience this our generation, or obviously a couple little generations, but when you look at the whole span of time, this is kind of a unique time. And it's, I saw this opportunity as of going back to that place, going back, exactly what you talked about, that place of, because I remember getting together. We would get together a couple days a week in high school. We had these high school bands. I had a few of them, and I couldn't wait. You know, I'd be staring at my book and drawing band logos or whatever, looking at the clock, going, "Oh, I can't wait to get to rehearsal because the rest sucked and it was boring." And my whole day was planned around that. I'd get there, and we didn't do much, but it felt like a lot when you're 14 and you're trying to learn an Iron Maiden song or something. But it was back to that place, and it what a wonderful opportunity that was. And like I said, this record would not, this band would not have existed if it wasn't for the pandemic. And that's the huge positive that came out of this big negative thing. And what a blessing that is to be able to go to, like, I probably would have never had that opportunity. Had the pandemic never happened, I would have just been in the machine. I got to write hits, got to do this, got to do that, got to tour, treating it like, as you get older, you sort of let that inner child in you sort of fade away and just be in the part of the machine. And we got to go back to the beginning. And I think that's an awesome thing. And that's why I'm proud of this record. So
that's amazing. I have a few questions. I wanted to, before I ask them, I wanted to mention a couple things. As a filmmaker, like I've been doing this since I was like 16, 17 years old. And I've seen so many movies now. I've seen so many shows and so much stuff. And I can tell you that, like, I used to have this opinion or this belief is like, just watch everything, just like watch everything you can possibly watch. And then, you can just learn what a bad movie is, what a good movie is. Well, I feel like that goal has been achieved, because now I'll watch stuff that's actually not half bad. And I'm just like, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is exactly what's going on. And people, like, if I ever talk out my thoughts, people are like, you've seen this movie before. And it's like, it takes a pretty special movie to like really get me interested anymore. And it's kind of, it can be a little snobby, like I can be like, man, I just wish I could just enjoy this movie like I used to enjoy movies. Mm-hmm. But what I have found is that what you're talking about, going back to like when I was a kid and I just wanted to make like action movies and war movies and like movies like that were just cool and fun. And I've been kind of reconnecting to that thing. And I started to notice that the movies that actually kind of land with me now are movies that don't follow the hit model. They don't follow, they're kind of a little bit off there, and I get that there's a market for 15-year-old kids that have never seen a lot of movies and it's all new to them. I get that. But for someone like me, as a filmmaker, I'm kind of like going, okay, well, what do I like to watch? And also, what do I want to make? Like, do I want to, like, if I could make a commercial movie, right, I could go do that and maybe I could make some money from that. But would that matter to me? And if it doesn't matter to me, why am I going out and doing all the work to try and make a movie if it really doesn't matter to me? You know what I mean? Then it's just kind of a job, right? And then why don't you just do some other job? Because there's a lot easier jobs. And I think what's interesting is that for you with music, tell me if I'm wrong, but do you find that you've maybe come away from music being a job and work, and now it's more like play and fun? And the other follow-up question I have, you're nodding, the follow-up question I have is, how has this impacted having a group of people to do a band with, if this is how you're doing it? Like, how's in the working relationship?
Oh, well, those are big questions. Yeah, going back to the whole job thing, and I as you were talking, I sort of had a thought, and part of I want to, like I said, I try to focus more on spiritual wealth and not physical wealth anymore. I mean, you still got to pay the bills and feed yourself and all that stuff, which is the eternal challenge of the artist, isn't it? It's the eternal challenge of, I struggle with that all the time. I go back and forth between trying to be like those great artists that really didn't care, those painters that really nobody knew who they were till after they were gone, but they left a legacy. I struggle between that because there's this fine line between, okay, I want to play to a lot of people and sell a lot of records and do this for a living. And then, but what's also important is, I think, Bruce Lee put it best, the key to immortality is to live a life worth remembering. And I think if you live as an artist, living a life worth remembering is being pure to your art. And I think that's why people are drawn to art. I think that's why they're drawn to it is you talked to this, I'm getting to a point. So you talked about, what do I do? Do I make movies that sell to 15-year-olds, or do I make movies that come from me? I think that at the end of the day, you're going to be more creative, and the art will be more important if it comes from the heart, if it comes from, and that comes at a tremendous price, doesn't it? It comes at a huge price. It comes at I may never get to see any of the fruition of this. It may happen beyond my lifetime, or I may never make any money from this while I'm doing it, and I may starve, and I may lose my wife, and I may do this, and I may do that, and but I thought, screw it, and that's where the pandemic was a benefit to me, because it was like, okay, cool, I have this brief moment to just do exactly what I want to do and how I want to do it, and do it from the heart and not care about anything else, and then just see what happens. And so I don't know if that sort of answers your question or what you were talking about. And the follow-up question,
band, and then working with the band, and how you guys have evolved with all this insight.
Well, there's a kind of a unique challenge that happens in music that's a little different, I think, than from film or other. Maybe I'm wrong. Is especially in the band thing. The band thing is such a difficult thing. And I saw this interview with the bass player from the Eagles. I mean, we're talking probably one of the most successful bands of all time. And he said, every rock and roll band is always on the verge of breaking up. And that is so true. It is such a fragile thing. And to the point where I had given up on bands, which is why I went into the country world. And, I had a little duo thing, and everybody else was sort of a hired gun and all that sort of thing. And then, but it can also be completely magical as well. Like the Eagles were magical. As if you read the story of that band, there was so much, turmoil behind the scenes, but they led a life worth remembering, didn't they? So I decided, okay, well, I want to go back to that part of the opportunity of the pandemic. Once again, is I had these two great players, in my opinion, some of the top drummer and bass player in the world, sitting here going, cool. Here I am, not having to worry about keeping the band together, not having to worry about paying anybody, not have all that stuff. And just, it was a very unique moment in time where we could go back to being teenagers, like I said earlier, and just pure art. So that was unique. But the challenge is, but what I decided to do this time, and what I hadn't done in a long time, to really answer your question, is when I first started in the music business in my late teens, early 20s, and put my first bands together, they broke up because partnerships are very, very difficult. They're very, very difficult. And egos get involved, and that guy's doing more than this guy. You lose. It's really easy to lose sight. But this time around, I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to the beginning again. I'm going to go, let's just be a pure partnership. Every dollar we spend, like when it got real and we recorded a bunch of songs, we're like, wow, this is getting real. And our manager got excited and label coming aboard. Let's form a company and let's go back to what I tried years ago, was let's do the partnership. As much as I had a bad taste in my mouth, but I thought to myself, I knew these guys for a long time. I've known them through most of my adult life. I knew their characters. I knew they were great guys. And so we decided to do a 3-way split. And that has really helped move things along. Now that normal life is coming back again, it's still a top priority for them because they are heavily invested from the beginning. So it hasn't been as challenging. And I think it's because the maturity, because we're definitely a mature band. We're older. We're not a young band by any means. I mean, we're a new band, but we're not a bunch of kids. But I think that we've all gone through that. And there's this sort of mutual respect. When we get them in the room together, we know how to treat each other, and we know how to get through conflict, and we know how to, all this sort of thing. So it has its own challenges, but not, the challenges have been sort of raising money and how are we going to make money, and how do we take this art that we created from this place of innocence and go, okay, how do we get to the next level? That's been the challenge. But as an entrepreneur, I find that stuff not that difficult to deal with. So
very cool.
Great.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Normally I don't write down questions when we have guests, but I was listening through it and I was like, you know what? I got some things I want to ask about in terms of the creative process. And also, I've been playing guitar a long time myself, and I've done a little bit of recording and playing, and I, man, the whole recording process, like I can understand just how that alone can break up a band.
Oh yeah.
And this is just me just jamming with a couple of buddies and just being like, oh my God, do I got to do another take on this? But anyhow, so listening through your album, and also a shout out to the two instrumental tracks that you've got on there, which I thought was just fantastic.
Thank you.
But I noticed in a lot of your songs, there are some not so subtle references to other songs, like both musically and lyrically, like, Sitting on the Corner, like there's like a reference to Steeler's Wheel that I picked up in there. There's a reference to Dylan in there in I think it was in Drink What You Drink, Roll What You Roll. Like there's some musicals. I definitely heard like some like Moby Dick kind of like throws in there. When it comes to paying homage to beloved bands, to your inspirations, while creating something new, how do you find the balance? How do you walk the line of not sort of overstepping that where now you're just kind of like taking from something and just as opposed to giving like a wink, which is what I thought you did from the things that I picked up on. It wasn't like some overt thing. It was just like a little like wink to me as a listener, that kind of gave me a smile. So how do you find that line?
Well, part of the reason why we did it is, music, marketing music, and just the music world has evolved quite a bit over the last, since we started playing till now. And right now, because of social media, it's very content driven, and you got to put stuff out all the time and all that kind of stuff, which is different than when we first started out in bands. And so there's people love, I'm noticing more than ever, they love, ear nuggets. You know what I mean? They want to hear the familiar stuff. And so, part of the answer is we have a really good entertainment lawyer. He's one of the best. And I basically asked, what can we get away with? I literally said, what can we get away with? He says, well, try to keep it under 8 bars and all this sort of stuff. So that was one thing we always sort of kept in mind. But I also think it's cool because those bands did the same thing. A lot of people don't realize. Led Zeppelin don't realize they got sued so many. I know there was a lawsuit in the last few years, but there was more than that before, but they were hushed up really quickly. And there was no social media back then and no 18 networks to expose what's going on. So they went through the same thing. They paid homage to all their favorite blues players. They would there's some songs that they literally took the riff and the melody, like way more than what we did. We took little nuggets. They took whole songs. So it's not a new thing, it's like anything else. It's just the bands before you set precedent, and then you try to take that precedent and take it to the next level and and I think what we're doing is kind of unique. I think that's always the challenge, right? You want to try to, be unique and be yourself. And I thought, well, let's take those kind of risks. Let's do that. Let's literally pay direct homage to somewhere. I don't see bands doing that. They either cover a song or they don't, and lyrically, you don't see it that often. I had a mentor. I'm gonna pull the curtain back a little bit here, and I had a mentor, producer, very successful songwriter, producer. He was signed to A&M Publishing. He was in late 80s, early 90s. He would have been considered the top 10 writers in the world, and everybody, he wrote with so many guys, so many artists. The list goes on. He had some big hits as well, and he said something I couldn't understand at first. He says, "Shawn, amateurs borrow, but professionals steal." And he literally for 2 years showed me all these songs that were literally stolen from other songs, all this sort of, he those guys will probably be upset if I'm even talking about this, but whatever. And I thought, well, it happens a lot more than people realize. So, and there's only 12 notes. So, I noticed it happened a lot with music, but not necessarily with lyrics. And I thought, what if I sort of try that? Take a little nugget here and a little, because let's face it, a lot of the audiences listening to it probably had never heard that Bob Dylan song or never heard that. And so it's partly an homage, but it's also carrying on a message as well. So I couldn't have written that better myself. So I'm just going to take that one line and work around it and go from there. You know, some people may have a negative opinion of that approach or whatever, but hey, it is what it is. And that's how I wrote the record.
I don't think there is. I think the negativity around that is it's a bit of, personally, this is my opinion. I think it's a bit of a confusion because like you can tell like how many stories have been made, for example, just movies, how many movies have been made about a guy and a girl who end up getting together. You know what I mean? And find love together. Like how many movies? Like you could say, well, someone stole my idea. I made the story of a guy and a girl get. It's like, well, there's certain things that they're like, they're almost they're just so a part of our culture that they're not really taking from them. You know what I mean? And I think there's a certain amount of like, if you are authentic and you're true in the way that you're borrowing, because I don't think it's stealing. I think stealing is trying to actually take value from someone else and that you haven't earned. Whereas like borrowing is more like a loan. Like I'm loaning this from you. And in some ways, the enhancement of my music makes people want to go back and listen to your music. You know what I mean? It's not like a taking. And the first script that I ever sold and got made, it was a short film called The Final Days. And it was about a guy who gets caught in university cheating on an exam and he's facing expulsion. And the story is really following this guy trying to figure out who the hell told on him and what he's going to do and how he's going to remedy it. And I borrowed from the play Othello, which is by Shakespeare, which is really about having, someone whispering in your ear that, you know, it's this person over here. And they're, and meanwhile, you don't realize that's the person that betrayed you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And if you looked at the movie, you could kind of see, oh, there's so many parallels to Othello, but it was not Othello. It was about a kid in a university who cheated on an exam. Yet, if you look at it, the parallels are very close. But in some ways, I think if you know Shakespeare, you would probably be able to identify it. But if you don't know it, it's all new to you. And then my point is that I think like when I listen to your music, I mean, I'm not as adverse in music as like Evan is. So I don't notice this stuff. So everything I hear is new. Whereas with him, he's like, oh, look at that. Yeah. A wink, wink over here and a wink, wink over there. And he's catching it all, right? And so I think the point is that that's kind of makes him remember old music that maybe he wants to go back and listen to. And then for someone like me, who's not as, versed in music, I'm like, wow, this is all cool, new stuff that I'm hearing. And just because I experienced it as new doesn't mean you stole it. I think it means that you borrowed a tradition, and I look at, as a storyteller, I look at Shakespeare, who apparently stole and borrowed from someone else anyway.
Exactly.
Right? So I just look at it as part of the narrative tradition. We're all kind of carrying the tradition along. And we're retelling in a lot of ways the same stories and probably in many ways remaking the same songs, painting the same pictures, but we're doing it again and again through an authentic expression. And all I got from your music is just an authentic expression. So in my roundabout way, I'm just saying like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a great thing that Evan opened up because I think a lot of artists struggle with this. We think, oh, I got to reinvent the wheel. And it's like, no, you don't. You just need to make it roll the way you make it roll.
Exactly. You just nailed it right there. Just you look, let's go. I'll go back to sort of the beginning where it all started for me. I just wanted to be a lead guitar player. I didn't want to learn how to sing. I didn't want to learn how to write songs, any of that stuff. I just wanted to be a lead guitar player and I wanted to be the best in the world. Naively said that to myself at 13 years old. Far from it. But that was the goal. And so what did I do? I went and studied every guitar player I could find. It was a full-time mission. I had all my guitar magazines and all this sort of stuff. And as I got older, I would, I'm on YouTube. I'm constant. That's never stopped. And if you really look at it, I don't do anything original, but what makes it original is me doing it. You see, that's the key.
Yeah.
Right. Because I will never sound like any of those guys anyway. And I stopped worrying about that. I'm going to learn that lick and I'm going to do it my way, or exactly like he's doing it, but somehow it's going to sound like me. And that touches on exactly what you're talking about and really, if you really want to go deep into this, down the rabbit hole, you look at the infinite intelligence where all art comes from, whatever, the heavens or whatever. It all exists. It all will exist. And it already has existed. Do you know what I mean? So you're just an antenna for it anyways. So you can't claim there's like, I really don't believe there's any such thing as originality or anything like that. It's just, you're going to perceive stuff that came before you. You're going to learn stuff and then you're going to regurgitate it your own way. And like you said, if you use it, if you do it properly and you express yourself doing it, then that's the way of the artist right there.
Hey, it's Evan with a quick public service announcement. If you're enjoying the conversation you're hearing and finding it helpful, then please help us and take a second to subscribe to the podcast. And we can all be people helping other people, and that's awesome. Now back to the show.
It's amazing. Evan and I just did a podcast episode on the challenge of free and original thought. And it's interesting, Evan, because this is an interesting element to that conversation is like one of the challenges of free and original thought is not just being in the zone, being the antenna, like thinking that you have to somehow do it with your ego, that you're like, I have to be so great. I have to be this amazing person to be able to come up with something that would actually impact somebody. And it's like, no, all you have to do really is tell the truth through you, whatever that means for you. And people, when you tell the truth, people, they might not like it, but they can't deny it because there's something about the truth. There's a quote I love. I'll just say this quote is, the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it, just set it free and it'll defend itself.
Absolutely.
And I think that art is a lot like that. You just it's like in a cage and you just got to let it out. And once you let it out, you'll see what it does and it'll amaze you. But it's the lion. It doesn't need to be you. It's the thing you're letting out of you or through you or whatever that might be.
Absolutely. I remember in college, that was such a great time. And I was rooming with a few of my buddies and we would have these deep chats over some beers or whatever. And we'd be chatting away. And I remember we would look at certain artists and I as much as I love Neil Young now, I didn't like him back then, especially as a guitar player. I was like, what the hell is this? And he goes, dude, what you can't, the thing about Neil Young is he's undeniable. And I went, oh yeah. And so is this guy. And so is that guy. That's why they are where they are. You don't have to like him. And you can sit and criticize him all day long. And you're probably right about 90, but he's undeniable at what he does. And that just still rings to me like it was yesterday to this day. Just be undeniable at what you do. Right. Mm-hmm. Just be undeniable, whatever that is, which I think is based on truth. I think you have to be honest and truthful. And I mean, you mentioned those licks that we did, that's what we do. We grew up playing those licks. So why not do them? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, it's just, why not just, and not, you're right. It's funny too. As you were talking, another thought came to mind is I was, I don't know. I think most artists do this, or most analytical minds are constantly having conversations with themselves. And I remember saying, it was today I think it was earlier today. I said, whenever I do something really good, it has nothing to do with me. And when it's really bad, it has everything to do with me. And I went, there's some, that's kind of deep when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's make it less about me. It was the point of that little chat in my head, right?
Yeah. When you can when you can just manage to get out of your own way to a certain degree, or get out of the way of the thing being created, is typically one of the sort of, just out of everything that's been said, it reminds me of, I teach actors and a lot of actors are always, when I was in classrooms and stuff, there's often this conversation that goes around. It's like, well, what makes you unique and interesting as an actor, and people trying to come up with this idea of what that thing is. And it always struck me as being kind of a bizarre thing. I mean, you know, maybe there's some utility to the exercise, but it's something I always kind of got a little bit bent out of shape about. And so I take a lot of actors through this exercise. I just say to everyone, you know, close your eyes, and I'm just going to say something to all of you. And it's just a very simple sentence. I say, you're walking down a path. Up ahead of you, you see a woman sitting. As you get close to her, she looks up at you and you make eye contact, and you keep walking. And then I ask everybody, what did you see? And everybody sees something different. Some people were on a city street. Some people were in a forest. The lady was old. The lady was young. There was just, and they all got the same thing. And so just to touch on something, because I think it's really important what you were saying, is that there is a part of you that's just, you don't need to worry so much about the thing coming through you being original and unique. You know, like, you have an original, unique perspective that's colored by every single experience that you have had in your whole life. So don't give it so much attention. If you just allow yourself, the what's original will come through.
Absolutely. Amen. I'm speechless.
Every time you share that little story, Evan, it always reminds me to just let go of trying so hard.
Totally. That's exactly it. Like, and I don't know about you guys, but being, you know, an entrepreneur and being an artist and you know, having a lot of responsibilities, I'm constantly overthinking all the time. What about tomorrow? What about this? What about this? You know, your mind's always going. And then I always got to stop myself. Just let go of the outcome. Everything's going to work out. And it generally works out better than your little you wants it to work out anyways. So trust the process. You know what I mean? And, you know, I'll even go as far as saying, and I use God as a very general thing. It can mean different things to different people, but just that simple term, let go and let God. I see that as let go and let the universe do its thing, and trust, trust your connectivity with the universe. Don't get in the way of it. Stop worrying about the rent, or just let it, just stay focused on what you want, or stay focused, and more importantly than that, being in the moment. And the outcome is always better than you imagined. And this band is exactly that. But what's interesting about that, you see how I shamelessly came back to the band, but
hey man, this is all about you. Brennan and I get to just talk about our bullshit all the time. So please. But
it actually goes back to that point where it's circumstances. And that's what I learned from it. It's circumstances that I was just forced to be in the moment. Suddenly there's no plans. There's nothing to do. I don't have to worry about this and that, you know, and it was like, and then it has been the most amazing experience of any musical journey I've ever taken since I was a kid. Everything just fell into place. I'll give you an example. By the time we're about 5 or 6 songs in, we're realizing we had a friend who we were out, so we're saying, hey, this needs some keyboard. Hey, buddy, can you put some keyboard on? Yeah, sure. I'll send you some tracks. And we're just building these songs, not worrying about anything, not worrying about the outcome. But then we're about 5 or 6 songs in. There's the 3 of us and going, guys, we're going to need some help here. If this is going to turn into a band, we're going to need a 4th member, a keyboard player, singer, sort of thing. Okay. And I didn't right away write down a note, go run a Craigslist, none of that. Okay. We just had a conversation, let go and let the universe do its thing. I'm not kidding you guys. One of the things I do on the side is I buy and sell gear. It's just kind of a hobby, and it's a way to make a couple extra bucks. And I was selling an amp, and this guy walks into a rehearsal. This is literally days after we had that conversation. He comes in, oh, I love this amp. And he picks up one of my guitars. He's a really good guitar. I was like, whoa, are you a guitar player? He says, no, I'm a keyboard player. Oh, and we had a keyboard in there. He starts, whoa, dude, come out to my van. And I crank him one of the songs, Find a Better Way, one of the first songs we recorded. The song's over. He looks over at me and he goes, I'm in. I never had to run an ad. And he's literally, I would say, the best keyboard player I've ever been around. He's a monster. But you see what I mean by let go of the outcome? You know what I mean? It was one of those, and this project's been like that right from the beginning. It's just, and the challenge now is to keep it that way. That's been the challenge. Now I'm back into sort of business mode, going, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to promote the record. Let go, relax. And one thing I was struggling with in the last couple of weeks is we came out with the record and we haven't gotten a lot of local press. We're starting to get some interest outside of town, but not a lot of local, you know, the province and this and that. And I was like, oh, just let go. And I'm in the barbershop yesterday and my manager calls me. He goes, hey, I just heard back from the province and they're going to, you know, so again, just if I would have pushed too hard, maybe that wouldn't have happened. It's just one of those, that seems to be for me anyways, is the ever growing challenge of you want to be in a mover and a shaker. You want to get stuff done. You want to get your movies out or your albums out and all that. That's where I find the challenge of trying to keep that process of just, you know, because in the beginning, when someone taught me that years ago, I was just like, that's just hippie jargon. What are you talking about? What do you mean let go? And no, get up and get some stuff done. But now I get it. It's that balance, right? So do you guys know what I'm talking about? Do you catch my...
Yeah. Totally know what you're talking about. I think one of the important elements of what you're talking about is that you're still active in your dream and your goal and your ambition. And actually, it kind of made me think, you know, what's great is you're an artist, but you're also an entrepreneur. And maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because I think the entrepreneur side, you know, I think of myself as an entrepreneur and an artist as well, but I find that the entrepreneur side is trying to control, it's trying to predict, it's trying to know all the information and try to make the best choice. Whereas the artist is like, let's just do this thing, it'll be fun.
Yeah, it's the inner child.
And and you might not have an answer to this, but I figure why not pose the question? When do we listen to the artist and when do we listen to the entrepreneur? How do we know to listen to, you know, the one that's trying to know the data, know the information, and kind of have the predictable outcome or the safe kind of like, you know, this is a smart choice person. And then the artist who's like, this would be fun. This is what I want to do. This is what's in my heart. Let's just go with this here, because I feel like there's a marriage. There's like a balance between the two, right?
Well, it's funny. I was going to say balance, and he took literally. I was thinking that before you said it.
Well, there we go.
You're right. It's that. I think the what's been working for me is making sure you silence that annoying analytical entrepreneurial mind. It's constantly going. Just silence it, and then act on the voice underneath, which is the artist's voice, which is the connection to the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And act on it instead of trying to force it. That's what's always gotten me in trouble, is just trying to force it. Because even when you try to force something and let's say it does work, it doesn't seem to really work. Sure, you made a bunch of money or you did. I've talked to people that have been what the world would call successful. You know, I've even got close family relatives that have done really, really well financially, but they're still really unhappy. They forced it and they got it done and there's lots of money in the bank, but did they really listen to that voice underneath that said, maybe you should have gone left instead of right? Right. So it's, for me, I think it's that balance between making sure the conversation is always happening between the artist and the entrepreneur and listening to each other. Hey, I need another hit song. Okay, well then be quiet so I can get you one, or, you know, or whatever. I can need another song. Then stop thinking about being a hit. Okay. You know what I mean? So that's a tough one, isn't it? We could go around in circles forever on that one. But I think it's just, I think that's the journey of mastery, isn't it? Is to learn everything and then forget it. Right? Is to learn how to do it and then forget it. And then trust the process. It's hard to put that kind of stuff in words. Do you know what I mean?
It is hard to put in words. I mean, I would say that, you know, for Evan and I with acting, which we've both done, and probably writing too. I don't know, Evan, I won't speak for you on that, but we've had this very similar experience. I mean, you know, I think when we were both younger actors, we were like, we're going to learn acting. We're going to be great at it. We're going to know everything. Evan was in 3 classes at one point. I think I was in a few at a certain point. It's like, you're just trying to learn everything you can. And then you hit a point, and I'm sure you can attest to this, Evan, is that you hit a point where you're like, I'm trying to learn how to like almost game this. And then you abandon it. And I think like, that's why Evan got into, like, he teaches Meisner, which is very moment to moment acting, which I did his intensive, and it was incredible because you basically let go of it all, and it's like humbling and exciting, and like all of the things that you're kind of looking for, but in a weird way, like your work does help you, but only if you let it go. It's really not useful if you try to use it. It doesn't hurt that you have it. It actually, I think it's helpful because you have a certain amount of like maturity, and like it's almost like a soldier that's gone to war. You know, like I know how to dig a ditch. I know how to hold a gun. I know how to do all this stuff. But then when you're in battle, you don't think about any of that. You duck for cover and you pop your shot, you know, whatever you want to call it, right? It's just like you're just in it, and it's chaos, but it's this organized chaos, right? And it's like that's kind of where the artist takes over, and it's really, to me, what I found, not just with acting but with writing, and it's like you got to just kind of let go and trust that whatever you got that's what you got. And the moment you try to be like, let me show you what I got, you're dead.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You just nailed it. I love the war soldier analogy, because I think a lot that way too. I read a lot of war strategy books, you know, The Art of War and 33 Strategies of War and all these sort of things. And you can apply that to day-to-day life. You can really, really apply to it. And you're right. When you're at battle, I think, I have in different ways, but not the way you're talking about, you have no choice but to be in the moment. You have no choice. You have to be 100% present, because if you're not, you're going to die. If you're not 100% present and being connected with, you know, something beyond yourself, whatever that is, that connection to the universe, if you get in your own way, you're gone. So you have no choice. Your survival depends on it. The challenge is bringing that sort of thinking and that sort of, or not thinking, however you want to look at it, bringing that approach to your day-to-day life, right? So I try to look at it. I see, this is what the stuff I learned from Jordan Peterson is that, or what I got from it was, life is one big battle. Whether you like it or not, it is, man. Everything you do, everything. So if you can bring that sort of soldier in the moment, present in the moment approach, then I think you'll most of the time do the right thing, or die. And oh well. It is what it is. You know, eventually we all got to die anyways. You know, so I always like to say, well, you got to die of something. But yeah, I like that. I don't know. That just inspired me to mention that, is that whole, and I think this podcast is about that. We're trying to, you know, what is the artist way? What, you know, we're all trying to figure that out. And I don't think you'll ever have it in a text. It's not something, it's just pointers. The whole thing is pointers. And I think that's why people are drawn to art. You know, it doesn't have dogmas. You can use everything as pointers, but it's abstract really at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's, I remember a few years ago, a student of mine brought me a book. They're like, oh, I think you might really like this book. I was like, yeah, okay. It was a book on creativity. And it wasn't a fantastic book, in my opinion, because it was attempting to pin the whole creative process down. It's just like, look, there's nothing mysterious about this. And, you know, yeah, okay, there's a few ideas for people who don't feel that they're creative. Because, you know, I believe everyone's creative. And that was a message in the book. Like, look, everyone can be creative. I was on board for that. But it was like, no, this stuff is all just, you know, like there's an actual thing. There's no mysterious process to this, which was, I find funny that, you know, in our world that we just have such an issue with living with mysteries. Like we just have such an aversion to it, as opposed to saying like, well, how do we learn to actually embrace the mysteries? Because that's a huge part of how you become creative. But I thought there was a lot of audacity in this author, you know, talking about Paul McCartney and saying how Paul McCartney, when he says, you know, he doesn't know where they come from, he's like, well, I'll tell you where it came from in Paul McCartney. It's like, you're going to tell the world how Paul McCartney does better than Paul McCartney does. Like,
it's, good luck with that.
Kind of insane to me. I don't know where I was going with that necessarily, but just the mysterious nature of creativity.
If I can make a comment on this, I've read maybe 100 or more screenwriting books. I've read so many books, right? And I remember when I was younger, I was just like, I'm just going to read all these books, and I'm going to start to see all the commonalities between all the writers, and I'm going to learn how to screenwrite. And I did. I taught myself how to screenwrite, and I'm not going to say that they weren't helpful, but one of the things that led me astray with all the screenwriting books I read was that I started to think that there was a way to write that was the way. And that if you just do these things, you're going to have a good screenplay. And even Final Draft, which is a very popular software for screenwriting, they even offered a thing where they're like, we'll give you Sid Field's outline for how to write a script in your actual script, like in the software itself. And it was like this, for a lot of people, it was like, oh, great. Now I just follow the Sid Field, paint by numbers storytelling. And it's like, yeah, but all of that is good as a initial step. And then you got to abandon it all, because once you marry it and you just stick to it, your story not only becomes predictable, like there's going to be 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 other stories that are just like your story that follow the exact same cookie cutter model. And what I had to learn to do was to basically be like, everything I've learned is a tool, and not every tool needs to be used. And in fact, sometimes very few tools need to be used. And what I might discover is that sometimes the tool that I need is nothing that's ever been used before, and I need to invent it. And I need to figure out, and it's like some weird thing, you know what I mean? And, or if it exists, I've never come across it, and I'm finding it myself for the first time anyway. And I think when we're talking about this, the entrepreneur model is like, well, let me know the right tool for the right job to do the thing. Whereas the artist is like, we'll figure out what we need when we get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we'll work with what we got, because it might be all we have,
Yeah. Yeah. And the challenge has always been to not let one stifle the other, which is, I think you were talking about earlier, is that's the ever eternal challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is like, I don't know if you guys go through this, but I'm very linear. So I'm either in entrepreneur mode or I'm in artist mode. I tend to write in chunks. And then when I'm in entrepreneurial mode, I'm more clinical. I feel like you're using different sides of the brain, perhaps, or whatever. But I think that the challenge, what you should try to strive to, is to blend the two. Bring some of that artist into the entrepreneurial thinking, and bring some of that entrepreneurial thinking into the artist. And I think when you properly create that balance that you're talking about, I think it however you define success, it becomes successful for you, whatever that is, right? Whether it's, I want to write a hit movie that means something. Oh, cool. And they just combine the two, balance it out. And I think your odds are better. I know I could be wrong, but that seems to be what I've learned so far.
I think that makes sense. I think maybe there's a time and a place for each hat, to be just in artist mode. I know as a writer, one thing I always tell writers to do is, look, when you're writing and you're creating, you're writing and you're creating. There's no editor in the room. Like, they don't get invited until the script is done, and then you can invite that person, yourself, if necessary, into the room. But don't edit while you write, just write. And I think with experience, you learn to not make your writer so critical. So if the writer does visit, it's like, it's not because I think the reason why I say that is because I think the editor can poo-poo an idea. You know what I mean? It's funny. Poo-poo. Yeah. Take an idea that's actually pretty good and go, that's a stupid idea. That won't work. Or this, blah, blah, blah. What about that? And then all of a sudden the artist is like, oh yeah, maybe not. Right. Whereas when you get further down the writing process into the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh draft, that's when you kind of need to have a team meeting. The artist and the editor, now that the script's done, the editor's has its pass, the artist has had their pass a few times each. usually. Then you have them meet and they talk and they have a discussion, and we see what battles and what wins. You know what I mean? Because what I found for myself is like, I wrote a script several years back, and I had kind of this I thought was going to be my big break. You know, I thought it was going to be my big break into the industry, and you know, and there was a lot of money that was kind of going to be backed behind it, and some names were being thrown around and all this stuff. And I'm like, I got my movie. I'm going to be, you know, this big thing. And the problem that I ran into, and I didn't have enough guidance or enough awareness to know any better, but what I did was I let my entrepreneurial editor commercial mind get too much ground, and my artist got pushed out of the room. And it wasn't until, and it fell through, but it wasn't until later that I realized, you know, who needed the floor more than ever was the artist, not this marketer, business entrepreneurial guy. What needed was the heart. And what I needed to do was just be like, try to tell my story with my heart and let other people be like, let me come in and try to make this more commercial. Because when I did it myself, I actually, and I talked with a pretty big actor in the industry later, and they said because they were there at one of the big table readings with all the producers and everything. And they were like, you know, like your story's pretty good, but, you know, I'm noticing there's like kind of like some stuff here. And I told them like, well, this was a story I wanted to tell originally. And they said, I would see that movie. That's the movie you should be writing. And I was like, holy shit, I've lost my way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. You know, it's funny touching on that. I felt the same way. I felt when I was looking back at the music I did before the pandemic, you know, for 10 or 15 years, I felt like exactly that. The entrepreneur was too much in the room. The P.T. Barnum side of me, I like to call it, was too much in the room. And I go, because I had so many close calls along the way, signed to a couple labels, songs. I had what the label was calling a turntable hit. I had a song that was all over the radio in Canada, and yet it just wasn't selling. It wasn't moving. And I go, what the? And I learned in the pandemic when I analyzed all that, I went, I think it's because there wasn't enough artists in the room. And that's why, going back to the beginning of this conversation, you see how I did that? I went back to the record. Is David Lee Roth said, always answer the question you want answered. But anyway, no. But going back to is I realized when I look back at all the stuff is, yeah, like you could go down a checklist. Oh, it's a great arrangement and it's 3 minutes and it's this and that. And it took 45 seconds to get to the chorus. And it's a pretty strong chorus. And la, 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 la. But why do people connect to certain bands? Why? And then that's the other question. Why didn't they connect to that song? Yet it followed literally the same formula. In some cases, maybe the performing was better, all this stuff. And I realized it took a lifetime to figure this out. I realized that somehow whatever they were doing was connecting to the soul of the people following them, to their heart, and that's the artist. The artist, that's why people are drawn to them. People aren't drawn to P.T. Barnum. You know what I mean? They weren't going there to see P.T. Barnum. They were going to see the weird people at the circus or whatever the art was at the time, right? They don't care about P.T. Barnum. They don't. That's why you don't see, you know, I mean, they're trying to do that nowadays. Though some of the technocrats are on the cover of magazines and stuff. But I really think when it comes down to it, they don't care about the business guys and all that stuff. They don't care. They don't care how much of a billionaire you became or how you changed the world. They care about the person that touches their heart with whatever. And that's why they love artists. That's why they love musicians and painters. And that's why there's this sort of special place for movie people as well. So sorry, I lost track a little bit. But yeah, the point is, you're right. I really inspired me when you said the artist should have been in the room more. And that's exactly what I did with this record. The artist was 100% in the room. The entrepreneur was sitting, you know, not even there for the recording of it. Now what I'm trying to do is make sure that the the entrepreneur is not too much in the room now, which is a bit of a challenge. So yeah, It's a good point.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, that just where this conversation has gone, like it's you know, it's made me think of some of my own experience with it, because Brandon, as you were mentioning, it's like, you know, at some point I was just studying, taking so many acting classes, trying to be amazing, and hitting a point where I stepped away from classes for a couple of years. I just couldn't, because I hit a point where I was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's in many ways a good gauge of when you need to let the other thing take over, which was what I needed and what I ended up but I didn't know that that was it at the time. It was like, look, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing, I'm using all the techniques that my teachers are telling me to use and blah, 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 blah. And yet here I am, and I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. I'm standing up here on stage, and I just feel like I feel like a fucking idiot. Like, mm-hmm. I'm not enjoying this. I'm not. There's nothing happening for me here that gives me reason as to why I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. And then stepping away. And I think the same thing is true the other way as well, because like the famous thing of like writer's block, right? Sometimes writer's block is because like you haven't kind of given yourself the place where you're going. You haven't given yourself that clarity yet of where you're trying to get to with this. To give yourself that sense of direction, mm-hmm. So that the artist can actually really play in that playground, right? It's just like, because otherwise the artist is like, am I in the sandbox? Am I on the monkey bars? Am I on the mm-hmm. slide? Am I on the, and it's just like, no, like just sandbox for now. It's just like, oh, okay, let's see what we can do in the sandbox, right? Yeah, it's just given me some perspective just for myself, in terms of everything that the two of you have been saying. That like, yeah, I think if you've been going hard artist or hard entrepreneur, if it's imbalanced, eventually you're going to run into a point where you're going to wonder what the hell you're doing.
Yep. Yeah, I was going to say, add to that is for me, failure has been a great teacher. A really, really good teacher, where you do everything right. You worked really hard and you put everything in place, and bang, you're still back to square zero. And what I've always chosen to do I've always chosen, I am not a victim. I've never been a fan of victim mentality. I don't quite understand it, to be honest. And so I thought, okay, well, what's missing? What can I learn from this? And sometimes they're really hard lessons, and sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. And like I was saying earlier, going back to that with this record, it was like I did everything right. I had a song on the radio. I did this. I had a tour. I had why didn't it connect? Well, again, the artist wasn't in the room enough. Wasn't and people shouldn't be afraid of failure. And I think if you're going to be a real artist, you better become good friends with failure. I know you guys know this. I don't have to know too much, even from our conversations in the car when we were driving to Alberta. I mean, that's what makes you a great artist, just doing it over and over. And this is another thought I had along the way while we were talking is, the best, go back to Paul McCartney. This is where, and the guy would say, well, Paul McCartney, how did Paul McCartney become Paul McCartney? Well, Paul McCartney was 15 years old in Germany, playing 6 nights a week, 5 sets a night, playing the hit songs of the day. By the time Paul McCartney was in his early 20s, he had done his 10,000 hours on performing and writing songs. You know what I mean? So how can that guy in that book he should have touched on that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so I think the way of the artist is just fucking doing it. Just do it over and over and over and over, and just keep doing it. And I think Paul McCartney, he would have been famous or not, would have just kept doing it and doing it and doing it, because that's what he was. He's an artist, and it just happened to connect, right? So yeah, there you go. That's the artist's way, folks. Thank you and good night.
Okay, so we do
perfect.
We do ultimately have to tie this baby all together.
Yeah.
Keep going and going and going.
Yeah.
A couple things. What Evan and I have is a tradition. Yeah. So something that's really kind of like, straight from the garage for us was Evan and I wrote a script, a few actually, when we were younger.
Oh, cool.
And then we had some interest in a few of them, and so we were like, okay, well, let's get together and start rewriting them. And we would have a beer and we would talk and we would have these kind of conversations, and we'd think, why didn't we record that? Which we did. And now we have a podcast. So it's a tradition. And I don't know if you have a beer, but we do a beer for a craft brewery every episode, and just kind of mention, oh yeah, I'm drinking from this brewery. And,
Yeah.
you know, we kind of appreciate the art of craft beer as a part of the tradition of these conversations. So we'll do that. And then we have some questions for you.
Okay, cool. Darn, I wish did I not read the whole email? I have no beer here. I should have got
no
some.
worries. No worries. But you know what? I'd love to get you back on, man. And I
likewise.
want to further this, because one of the things that I'm really happy about is listening to you talk and hearing your journey has reconnected me with a few things. And I feel like these conversations always do, but they've reconnected me with how important it is to get back to the grassroots of why I'm doing this and why we're all doing this. And I think that, you know, we can forget, you know, and for me, it was just being a kid making movies and having fun and getting together with my friends. And, you know, and acting was kind of similar. It was getting to play imagination and, you know, and just do something fun, you know? So that's been a big insight for me. But anyway, I'm drinking. Let me start. I'm drinking a hazy IPA. And I don't think I've ever had this one before, but it's called Ghost Ship Hazy IPA. And who the hell is this from? This is from Lighthouse Brewing. Yeah, so that's what I'm having, and it's tasty. It's very tasty. It's very.
I'm gonna remember, if I get the honor to do this again, I will make sure there's beer in the fridge here in the studio this next time.
Perfect. We'll definitely have you back on, because this has been a great conversation. I feel like there's a lot more we can get into. I'm drinking. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. Jongleur wit beer. It's from Strange Fellows Brewing in Vancouver, and it's great. It is great. It's helped fuel this conversation for me.
And I'm jealous.
Next time,
I'm fearless.
we'll double check to make sure you get the reminder and the note to
Please,
have a brew on.
Thank you. My apologies for not getting the whole memo.
It's all good. It's all good. So we have a few questions we go through for everybody, every guest we have on. And yeah, you know, sometimes they're rapid fire. Sometimes you get into a little more detail, whatever fits for you.
Okay.
But I'll kick it off, Evan, and you do the next question. All right. So they get deeper as we go. But sometimes the first ones are pretty deep. So what's the most important book you've ever read?
Oh boy. Way of the Superior Man by David Dida. There's so many. I'd have to give you like 20, but if I had to sum one that sort of affects my whole life, I would say that one.
That's a good one. I just read that one last year for the
I'm
first
still
time.
trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
Still trying to process it.
It's that was a book that was written like 20 years ago, and it felt like, why have I not read more books like this? It has an ahead of its time kind of vibe to it.
Well, I didn't know it was. This is the first time hearing that it was written 20 years ago, because I thought it was a book written during this sort of new age Eckhart Tolle thing that sort of happened in the last 10 years. So, wow, that's even more fascinating to me now.
Yeah.
That makes me look at the book even deeper. Whoa, that's incredible. That guy was ahead of his time.
Mm-hmm. All right. Your second question. What is a film? What film has had the most impact on you?
There's so many, but this is probably cheesy answer. Probably everybody says this, but I have my reasons for it. Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason being is I feel like Andy Dufresne a lot of the times, you know, serving 25 years. You know, there's a lyric in one of the Queen songs in We Are the Champions, and it just rings for me. I've served my sentence but committed no crime. And that's what it feels like being in the music business sometimes. And I feel like Andy Dufresne just digging through all that mud and shit to get to clean on the other side, to get to that boat on the beach. And that's what the music business, I just so relate to that movie, you know, in so many ways, on an archetypal level, not on a, you know, I've never committed any of those crimes or planned to or anything like that. But it's if you look at that story from an archetypal point of view, it really speaks to me. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a profound movie.
Mm-hmm.
I've shared my experience of when I first saw that before on the podcast, and it was a big one. Okay, next question. What's a song or an album that takes you somewhere?
Oh my God, these are questions. These are big questions. How do I narrow this down? Well, there's you got to remember, I've been a student of music my whole life, so I've listened to a million records. But I think one that's really special to me is Van Halen 1, because it's timeless, and because every time I listen to it, I go, I can't believe this was recorded in 1978. It changed the world. It changed the musical world for me, the rock world, I guess, but also too, my son sings along to it. And my son is named after one of the band members that just passed away. And so I just find that so special when we're in the car and he's on his way to a hockey game and he's singing along to a song that changed my life when I was not much older than him. So yeah, that album. Geez, you brought a tear to my eye there.
All right. Fourth question. Where do you think creativity comes from?
Oh, that's like asking to describe the flavor. What does chocolate taste like? Can anybody really describe what it tastes like? Not really. Tastes like chocolate. Where does creativity come from? Well, okay. Let's look at it from an analytical point of view. I think it comes from two. If I had to let's try to simplify it, if that's even possible. I think it does come from the inner child. I think it's the inner child. I'm going to look at it from a psychological point of view. It's the inner child trying to express itself. And so, because if you look at a lot of great artists, they're tortured souls, and they came from horrible childhoods a lot of the time, not always. And that's that tortured inner child, wounded inner child trying to express itself. And then you got the flip side of it, where if you're with a happy child, you can see them naturally express it. And if you can nurture that all the way to adulthood, those type of people tend to be very good artists in a completely different way. So I think it comes from your inner child, if you're specifically talking about a human being and how they express themselves through art. There you go. That was a tough question.
You found your way, though.
I don't even know what I just said. I just sort of let it out.
So, how do you find inspiration?
I don't go looking for it. I don't try to find it. I just sort of well, that's not true. That's not true. I put on a Van Halen record. That always helps. If I want to be inspired, or a Mark Knopfler record, Dire Straits. I put on a guitar player that just rocks my world, and then it makes me feel like I can do anything. So there you go.
Mm. All right. Well, that one came out quick. All right. Your second to last question. What is one piece of advice or one thing you would say to your childhood self?
Don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. Don't worry about it. It's all going to work out. Stop worrying. That's what I would say.
Nice. All right, last question. What would your future self tell you today?
Did you spend enough time with the people you love? Make sure that you do. Make sure you spend enough time with the people that you love. It goes by too fast. There you go. And that ties in with the whole don't sweat the small stuff. And do what you love to do. Just focus and keep your mind on what you want. And, and feel what you feel in the moment. Don't be afraid of it, and tell people you love them more, and tell people they're great, and compliment them more, and bring more light to the world, and try to not bring too much darkness to it. So there you go.
Shawn, this has been a great chat. Do you tell our audience out there, like, where can they find you? Where can they listen to Trigger Mafia? What do you want them to go and see? What do you want them to hear?
Sure.
What do you want them to look at?
Before I do that, I want to say I literally laughed. I cried. This podcast became a part of me. So thank you for that. It was an awesome experience, actually. And I can't believe we've been doing this for an hour and a half. It felt like 15 minutes. So it's been really cool. Really, really cool journey. I hope I get to do it again because I had a really good time. Go check out triggermafia.com. Part of the reason why we picked that name, it's easy to spell. It's very common spelling. So triggermafia.com, all the links are there. You can, support it if you truly do want to support. If you like what you're hearing, buy our merch, because that really helps. It helps pay for the next recordings. It helps keep the thing moving forward. And if you don't, that's cool too. And just check it out. Check us out. And you can download the album. Costs nothing. It's all available on all your favorite streaming sites. And communicate with us. We like to know. We like to hear. We like to hear from people, and we like to engage. So go check it out, and make sure you turn the speakers up loud, because it was produced to rock.
Right on. Well, man, I mean, I just want to say, like, I think this has been great. This has been great. And I do hope that you will come back on again, because I think what you've done today, just sharing your story and sharing some of your insights, I think it's really helpful for people to hear that. It's been helpful for me, and I've been in artistry for like more than half my life, and it's great sitting down with another artist and hearing about their process, because you start to realize, you know what? We're kind of all in the same boat, and we're just doing it our own way. And that's what makes it such a great ride,
Absolutely. Speaking of rides, I love that drive for that reason. When we were chatting, and there was times where we didn't talk a lot. We were just sort of sitting in silence and letting the other guys talk. And then when we did talk, there was some deep introspective. I walked away from that journey. We didn't end up, that trip didn't go where I thought it was going to go. But sometimes there's kind of a moral to that story is again, just let go, let God, try to learn from. I went on that trip for different reasons than I thought. And you were a big part of that. So thank you. I wouldn't be here today. Right. So yeah, it's awesome. So thank you. And fake it till you make it. That's my advice to everyone. Fake it till you make it, everybody.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.